The world has always seen Jim Carrey as one of the most unpredictable comedic geniuses in Hollywood history. His energy was explosive, his facial expressions impossible to imitate, and his performances felt less like acting and more like complete transformation. For decades, audiences watched him dominate comedy through films like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. To millions of fans, Jim Carrey wasn't just funny. He was untouchable. But behind that image, stories have slowly emerged from people who actually worked with him. Some admired his intensity. Others walked away confused, uncomfortable, or emotionally exhausted. And one of the most surprising voices to speak about it was Dave Chappelle. What made Chappelle's comments hit differently was the fact that he once genuinely admired Jim Carrey. Before Dave became one of the most respected comedians alive, Carrey represented something larger than life to him. Jim had already conquered Hollywood while Dave was still climbing. Meeting him should have been unforgettable for all the right reasons. Instead, it became one of the strangest experiences of his career. To understand why that moment affected Chappelle so deeply, you have to understand who Jim Carrey became long before the cameras ever rolled. Jim Carrey's story started far away from Hollywood glamour. Born James Eugene Carey in Ontario, Canada, he grew up in a family that struggled financially for years. His father Percy worked ordinary jobs while trying to support the family, and when money disappeared, things became brutal. At one point, the entire family reportedly lived out of a van while trying to survive. Teenage Jim worked janitorial shifts and factory jobs overnight just to help keep the household afloat. That hardship shaped him permanently. People who knew him early often described him as someone desperate to escape reality through performance. Comedy became survival. While other kids were trying to fit in, Jim was twisting his face in mirrors for hours, practicing impressions and trying to create characters that could make people forget pain even briefly. By the late 1970s, he started performing stand-up in Toronto comedy clubs. The first shows were disasters. Audiences rejected him. He bombed badly more than once. But failure didn't stop him. It sharpened him. Eventually, his bizarre style started attracting attention because nobody else performed like him. He wasn't delivering jokes in a traditional way. His whole body became part of the act. Audiences didn't know whether to laugh or stare in disbelief. That uniqueness became his ticket out. By the early 1990s, Hollywood couldn't ignore him anymore. Then came the explosion. In one unbelievable run, Jim Carrey starred in multiple box office hits that transformed him into one of the biggest stars on earth almost overnight. Every studio wanted him. Every producer wanted his energy. Every audience wanted more. But fame did something unusual to Jim Carrey. The deeper he went into performance, the harder it became for people around him to figure out where the acting stopped. Co-stars often described him as intensely committed, but also exhausting. Directors admired his genius while privately struggling to control the chaos surrounding him. His comedy looked effortless on screen, yet behind the scenes it often came from emotional extremes that few people fully understood. Then came the project that changed everything. In 1999, Jim Carrey accepted the lead role in Man on the Moon, playing legendary comedian Andy Kaufman. Kaufman himself had been deeply unusual, famous for blurring the line between comedy and reality. He confused audiences intentionally. Sometimes people didn't even know if they were watching a joke or a breakdown. Jim didn't simply study Kaufman. He disappeared into him. Almost immediately, stories from the set became legendary. Crew members stopped calling him Jim because he refused to answer to his own name. He stayed in character all day, sometimes all night. Conversations became surreal because nobody knew whether they were speaking to Jim Carrey or Andy Kaufman. Some people praised the dedication. Others thought it went way too far. The environment reportedly became emotionally draining. Crew members had to adjust their entire behavior around him. Directors struggled to communicate normally. Even simple interactions became performances. And then one day Dave Chappelle walked directly into that world. At the time, Dave was already respected in comedy circles, but he still looked up to Jim Carrey. The introduction reportedly happened through Norm Macdonald, someone both comedians respected. Dave expected to finally meet the real Jim Carrey. That never happened. The moment Chappelle arrived on the set of Man on the Moon, he realized something strange immediately. Jim wasn't behaving like himself at all. He was fully acting as Andy Kaufman, speaking like him, moving like him, reacting like him. Not for the cameras. For everyone. At first, Dave thought it was temporary. It wasn't. Hours passed and Jim never dropped the character once. Even stranger, the entire set had adapted to it. Crew members addressed him as Andy. Conversations revolved around maintaining the illusion. Nobody seemed willing to break the performance. For Chappelle, the experience became deeply uncomfortable. Years later, Dave described the situation with humor, but underneath the jokes was visible disappointment. He explained that he went there hoping to meet one of his comedic heroes, only to spend the entire time speaking to a character. What bothered him wasn't simply method acting. It was the feeling that Jim no longer seemed present at all. Dave later implied that everyone around Jim had essentially agreed to participate in a strange reality where the actor himself had disappeared behind the role. And for someone like Chappelle, who built his comedy around honesty and authenticity, the experience felt artificial and unsettling. That encounter stayed with him. Because from Dave's perspective, the weirdest part was that nobody else seemed disturbed by it anymore. The people on set had normalized the behavior completely. Over time, more stories emerged confirming just how extreme Jim's transformation had become during filming. Directors and crew members admitted that dealing with him became exhausting. Some felt fascinated by the commitment. Others quietly questioned whether it had crossed into obsession. Even Jim later admitted the role affected him psychologically. He described the experience as if Jim Carrey temporarily vanished during production. He spoke openly about losing his own sense of identity while becoming Andy Kaufman. For audiences, that sounded artistic. For people around him, it sometimes felt frightening. And this is where Dave Chappelle's comments hit harder than most celebrity stories. Because Dave wasn't criticizing Jim's talent. He never denied the brilliance. In fact, that made the situation worse. Chappelle understood exactly how gifted Jim was. That's why watching him disappear so completely disturbed him. There's a major difference between acting and losing yourself. And according to people who witnessed the Man on the Moon production, that line became dangerously blurry. The strange thing is that Jim Carrey's public behavior after those years only intensified the mystery surrounding him. As time passed, interviews became increasingly philosophical and unpredictable. Jim started speaking less like a Hollywood celebrity and more like someone detached from reality itself. He discussed ego, identity, consciousness, and illusion in ways that confused many viewers. One viral interview during New York Fashion Week shocked audiences when Jim wandered into an existential monologue about meaninglessness while reporters stood speechless around him. Some viewers called him enlightened. Others thought he looked deeply troubled. That split reaction followed him everywhere. At the same time, his personal life became increasingly chaotic. Relationships ended publicly. Emotional struggles surfaced repeatedly. Friends and colleagues often described him as someone capable of incredible warmth one moment and complete withdrawal the next. Then came even darker headlines. In 2015, the death of his former girlfriend Catriona White became a massive public controversy. Lawsuits followed. Media coverage intensified. Jim denied wrongdoing and eventually the legal battles ended, but the emotional damage remained attached to his public image. For many fans, it felt like watching someone slowly drift further away from the person they once recognized. Meanwhile, Dave Chappelle's own career moved in the opposite direction. Dave became famous for stripping away illusions instead of creating them. His comedy attacked fake behavior, hypocrisy, and Hollywood performance culture itself. While Jim disappeared deeper into characters and symbolism, Chappelle built his reputation on brutal honesty. That difference explains why their interaction mattered so much. To Dave, authenticity is everything. And meeting Jim during that phase felt like meeting someone trapped inside a performance they couldn't turn off. Over the years, other actors also hinted at similar experiences working with Jim Carrey. Some admired his intensity tremendously. Others admitted it could be overwhelming. During Man on the Moon specifically, several people described the set as emotionally exhausting because Jim never allowed normal interaction. Even acclaimed filmmaker Milos Forman reportedly struggled at times with the constant character immersion. The issue wasn't whether Jim was talented. Nobody questioned that. The issue was whether total psychological transformation is healthy when the cameras stop rolling. That debate still surrounds method acting today. Some actors believe complete immersion creates greatness. Others argue it becomes self-destructive and harms everyone nearby. Jim Carrey became one of the most extreme examples Hollywood had ever seen. And Dave Chappelle witnessed it firsthand. What makes the story even more fascinating is how differently fans interpret it. Some people hear Dave's comments and see proof of artistic genius. They believe Jim sacrificed comfort and normality to create unforgettable performances. To them, the discomfort was worth it because the results became cinematic history. Others hear the exact same story and see warning signs. They see someone consumed by performance to the point where real human connection started disappearing. That tension has followed Jim Carrey his entire career. Because no matter how strange his behavior became, the talent was undeniable. Movies like The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind proved he was far more than a comedian. He could deliver emotional depth that stunned audiences and critics alike. But those same performances also revealed something vulnerable beneath the comedy: a sadness, a loneliness, an exhaustion. Over time, Jim himself began speaking openly about feeling disconnected from fame and Hollywood culture. He talked about success as if it failed to deliver the happiness people imagined it would. He often sounded less like a triumphant celebrity and more like someone searching for meaning after surviving decades inside the entertainment machine. And perhaps that's what Dave Chappelle recognized immediately on that set years ago. Not just eccentricity, not just commitment, but someone who seemed unable to separate himself from the mask anymore. Ironically, Jim Carrey built his career by becoming whoever audiences wanted him to be: a detective, a liar, a cartoon villain, a grieving lover, a manic comedian, a living rubber-faced spectacle. But eventually people started wondering whether Jim himself still existed underneath all those transformations. Dave Chappelle's story didn't create that question. It simply gave audiences a rare glimpse behind the curtain. Because when Dave tells the story, you can hear the confusion in it. He expected a human encounter and instead walked into a performance that never ended. For a comedian who values truth above image, that experience clearly stayed with him. And maybe that's why the story continues spreading online years later. Not because people hate Jim Carrey, but because the story forces audiences to confront something uncomfortable about fame itself. Hollywood rewards people for becoming larger than life. It rewards obsession, transformation, psychological intensity. Audiences celebrate actors who lose themselves in roles. But nobody really talks about what happens afterward. What happens when the performance doesn't stop? What happens when the audience goes home, but the character remains?